Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. I wanted to make this video to respond to the entire US-Canada tariff situation and talk about how Canada's politicians have utterly failed this country. We are in such a weak position right now, and it's not because of the US and Donald Trump. Yes, does the tariffs make life harder for Canadians? Sure. But so many of the problems that have led up to this are mostly on our side of the border, and it feels like the whole Team Canada op that's going on right now is trying to paper over the fact that it's mostly been Canadian politicians making life difficult for Canadians. Do I agree with Donald Trump putting tariffs on us like this? No. At the same time, there's been a lot of unreasonable behavior on both sides of the border, and no, it's not unpatriotic to say that. I am a Canadian patriot. The difference with other people who are just saying that Canada's right and the US is wrong is they are what I would call a Canadian nationalist, which is different than a patriot. A patriot wants our country to be better in the best way possible for the long run. A nationalist just wants to say Canada's right, even when we aren't right. I want to get into what Justin Trudeau said in his announcement today and then move on to some other issues I don't think enough people are talking about. But before we get into that, guys, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 100,000 by mid-December. Really appreciate it if you share this video or if you subscribe. If you're not yet subscribed, leave a comment on what you think about the whole situation. But without further ado, let's talk about Justin Trudeau's announcement. Now, I'm going to say, honestly, wasn't too bad in the sense that Trudeau kind of did moderate himself. He didn't act like he's a big man in the room who can take on the US. He did have a more subtle tone, which was, a decent move. The problem is, again, it doesn't matter how good Trudeau's announcement was. He's not really the prime minister right now. Parliament is not sitting. In fact, also the BC legislature, which is one of the other primary problems in Canada right now, because that is where all of the drug trafficking is happening, or at least the plurality of it, they're also not meeting because David Eby and the BC NDP want to be on like a 200-day vacation. It's utterly ridiculous what's happening in British Columbia right now. But I just want to play this 43 seconds. Trudeau talked about how Canadians and Americans need to be friends, and we've always had a good relationship, and we rely on each other for things, and that's all fine and good. But let's get to really the meat of what he was after today.
The actions taken today by the White House split us apart instead of bringing us together. Tonight, I am announcing Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
And that is approximately, based on what people have calculated, 30% of American exports into Canada.
This will include immediate tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods as of Tuesday, followed by further tariffs on $125 billion worth of American products in 21 days' time to allow Canadian companies and supply chains to seek to find alternatives.
And this is actually not that bad of an approach because, again, the problem with doing a tariff for tariff, like dollar for dollar approach, is that it ratchets up the tension so high that we cannot place ourselves as the reasonable ones. Are we the reasonable ones? Well, not really, and I'm going to get into that further. But it is generally smart not to kick Canadians in the face by ramping up tariffs to a dollar for dollar amount. I, unpopular opinion, would actually prefer we don't tariff the US, and that's not because I'm weak or I want the US to win. In fact, we would win if we didn't tariff them because their people would complain about their higher prices while Canadians could keep buying stuff for the lower prices whenever an American product happens to be cheaper than other alternatives. And so that's the approach I would take, but at least this is moderate. But again, the kind of man behind the curtain right now, the sort of thing that nobody kind of wants to acknowledge, but we have to acknowledge is this guy really the prime minister right now? Not really. Even all his ministers, are they really the ministers? Is Chrystia Freeland or Mark Carney, if they take over as prime minister, Mark Carney, who wouldn't even have a seat in parliament, are they going to keep any of these people on? That's the problem. Donald Trump does not respect any of these people. Should he respect them to be nice? Maybe, but it doesn't matter. And that's honestly my answer to a lot of people saying, well, Trump's not being reasonable. Well, maybe if we do increase border security or military spending, he still won't take off the tariffs. Well, frankly, that doesn't matter because we don't know what he would have done if we didn't have a government that has been insulting him for the last 4 years, or a government that has had its prime minister ostensibly resign, but not until March, and that we're not sitting and there's a liberal leadership race that's going on. We can only deal in the reality that we're currently in. And so many people want to kind of unpeel their minds and try and find the real secret reason why Trump is doing this. His officials keep saying it's border security and NATO spending. I think we can generally trust Trump's officials more than we can trust Trump because Trump tends to bloviate a bit and he'll say something that he doesn't quite mean. He'll say that we have a big trade deficit with Canada, but that's the thing he'll bring up. But his officials who have the official readout of what Trump really wants from this will keep saying it's border security and military spending. And right now, in as much as they can actually do, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe have been doing a good job of visually and theatrically showing how much more security they're putting on the border. Some people have said this, and I think it was actually J.J. McCullough who said it, who's right. Actually, no, it wasn't J.J. McCullough. It was somebody else. Although J.J.'s had some good points about all this. He's mentioned that the problem with all this is that it's going to justify other premiers and Trudeau and the Liberals diving deeper into socialism, more corporate welfare, higher taxes, more subsidies to random industries, more relief programs and more random things that we can't afford. It's going to incentivize all that because we got to be Team Canada right now. That's what Doug Ford, the supposed conservative Ontario, is proposing. And that's why I keep telling people, if you live in Ontario, don't reward Doug Ford's complete nonsense with his early election and pretending he's protecting Canada when he is, in fact, really shirking his duty to increase border security at the time when that is the thing that we could potentially avoid this thing by ramping up. Again, you'll have people say, well, what happens if Trump just doesn't remove the tariffs even if we ramp up border security? Well, that doesn't matter if we haven't checked, if we haven't called his bluff first. If we actually, since December when Trump first announced he might put tariffs on us, if we quickly ramped up border security, showed that we had drones on the border and all this stuff, guess what? Trump loses his argument because now he would have to say, I was lying and I just wanted to tariff you anyways, which in northern US states that rely on a lot of Canadian imports, they would be a little bit ticked. And then the Republicans would lose a ton of support in the midterms. That is the real pressure point that Canadian politicians have. Do what Trump generally wants if he's right about some things, and he definitely is right about drugs and border security in Canada and our lack of defense spending. And then if he's lying, then you can basically go to his own people and say, he was lying and he's about to make your life more expensive simply because he wants revenues out of Canadian trade items, which are going to make life way worse if you live in Oregon, Washington, Montana, Idaho, the Dakotas, Tennessee, Idaho, or sorry, Iowa, Wyoming, all those states, Utah, all the way down to Louisiana. Even Louisiana's main export-import market is Canada. Anyways, I thought this was a great take from J.J. McCullough because right now Canada and the U.S. or Canada and Mexico are for some reason like uniting on this issue, even though our border security issues are way different than Mexico. We do have serious border concerns, just as we actually have issues with U.S. border security. The U.S. has issues with our border security, but it's not even in the same universe as the type and scale of the issues with Mexico. And in response to this post that Polymarket Intel said that Mexico and Canada and to announce details and joint retaliatory tariffs against the United States, JJ says, being linked to Mexico has caused enormous damage to Canada's interests. The absolute last thing Trudeau should be doing right now is anything suggesting we stand arm in arm with Mexico or whatever, but I bet he will. And again, even though Trudeau's announcement wasn't terrible, if he does stuff like this, that is the worst possible thing he could do. Before I go back to Trudeau, I now need to jump over to British Columbia Premier David Eby, who, let's be clear, is one of the main problems in this entire situation. Where do you think the ports are that the U.S. has problems with? It's all in British Columbia. All the big drug labs are in British Columbia. The amount of drugs being seized in British Columbia, and that's with our very weak enforcement, is nuts. Frank Vaughn has been doing a great job on his YouTube channel calculating out with very reasonable standards how big the market in illegal drugs and money laundering is currently in Canada. He estimates it at around $236 billion a year. That's not directly calculated into our GDP, but in terms of the scale of seizures going on and what their estimates are of how many people they catch and how many people they don't catch, and all of the money laundering that goes on literally from terrorist groups laundering money through casinos in Canada and through the real estate market and whatnot. Hezbollah from Lebanon has been caught money laundering in Canada, and not much goes on. The IRGC was doing it. Tons of people do it. The CCP does it all the time. A lot of Indian gangs do it. It's nuts. But this is what Premier David Eby said in response to this whole situation, not looking weak at all. And I am being heavily sarcastic for people who aren't picking up on that.
Today we're at a crossroad, and the journey ahead won't be easy. But there is no place on earth I would rather be to face this threat than right here in British Columbia.
I don't even know if he's in British Columbia. The man's been on vacation so much. He could be green screened in. I wouldn't be surprised.
We have everything we need to succeed. Abundant natural wealth and clean, cheap energy. A diversified economy and access to global markets. And our most important resource of all, you.
You and your tax dollars that you're giving to me to subsidize nonsense. By the way, our access to global markets is also tied in with the problem. So many Chinese goods, so many Chinese shipments brought into Canada have less than a 1% shipping container inspection rate. And I even had a disagreement with Anthony Koch on this. I agree with Anthony Koch on tons of things, but he said, well, what's the shipping container inspection rate in the United States? And I said, and this is, again, the key phrase I've been using, it doesn't matter. Because right now the situation is the US having a problem with our lack of security. And so we can't just say, well, what's your shipping container inspection rate? That's their own business. The problem is they're saying that way too many drug supplies are getting into Canada, being manufactured into hard opioids, and then being moved over their border. And then you'll have someone like Trudeau undermine himself on other occasions by saying, you know, they only seize about 1% of the fentanyl coming into the US through Canada. But that neglects that the fentanyl coming in through Canada is usually of the highest potency rate. They're not catching that much of it. All we are calculating is how much they catch, and we do not defend most of our border, and we do not inspect most vehicles coming over the border. And then some people will then say, well, you know, it's the United States' responsibility to monitor what's coming into their country. And again, that's another situation where I say it doesn't matter, because the United States is mad that they're the only line of defense, it seems, and things just pass through our ports without notice. Drugs are manufactured with not that much crackdown in Canada, and then they're able to be walked over the border over reserve land or just put into the headrest of a truck, and that they just do not have the capacity to stop every single truck and look at the drugs. They can do a little bit, but unless they want it to take hours for every single truck to move across the border, they would like for Canada to do a little bit of enforcement before it becomes their problem. That's the real problem here. But I'll let David Eby finish. He makes the weirdest threat in this later on.
The people who call this beautiful place home. British Columbians are hardworking, highly skilled, and resilient. Through this uncertainty, our government will be there to stand up for you and your family.
Didn't you kick out unvaccinated nurses and doctors when they wouldn't comply with ridiculous mandates? All this is so silly, and this is why I hate Team Canada. All the Team Canada people were the ones kicking you in the face for years, but no, link arms with us so that we can pass more socialist policies that, in fact, will not help the economy.
As proud British Columbians and Canadians, we will meet this moment together and come out stronger on the other side. Together we'll fight, not fold. Be resolute, not roll over, because that's just who we are. Here in the true North, strong and free.
Oh, this wasn't the clip, but I could probably just tell you what it was. He announced that he was going to demand that BC liquor stores stop carrying liquor manufactured in Republican majority states. Yes, that is how asinine human Gumby here is. Gumby, the premier of British Columbia. No, that's foolish. That's really weak looking. It doesn't even matter if it exerts some pressure on them. We look really weak and petty by doing it that way, that we're making it about Republican versus Democrat in the States. And in fact, that we are in favor of Democrat states in Canada, but we are not friendly with Republican states. It ends up antagonizing the very people who are Donald Trump's allies, and it gives them some incentive to harden their backs as well and not let up on the tariffs, even if we meet NATO spending goals and we ramp up border security. It's just patently foolish. Anyways, we got this other clip of Justin Trudeau talking about how we're all in this together, guys. We're all going to take on Donald Trump and the US together. And no, again, the thing that is going on here is none of these people, Doug Ford, Justin Trudeau, David Eby, a lot of the other premiers except for Scott Moe and Danielle Smith, none of them have earned this. None of them have earned this unity moment because they're all divisive. They've all been overtaxing us, overregulating us, locking us down, mandating medical treatments for people, all this sort of stuff. But now it's time for us to all to come together.
I also want to speak directly to Canadians in this moment. I'm sure many of you are anxious, but I want you to know we are all in this together.
He's not even in it together. He's leaving in March.
The Canadian government, Canadian businesses, Canadian organized labor, Canadian civil society, Canada's premiers, and tens of millions of Canadians from coast to coast to coast are aligned and united. This is Team Canada at its best.
At its best, you're leaving. Again, I can't. The nerve of this man. We're all Team Canada guys. By the way, I got a mojito that has my name on it somewhere in Jamaica. Here's a great moment from a committee meeting, a clip that Dan Lloyd, the Conservative MP, posted about just how much organized crime there currently is in Canada. Again, Frank Vaughan, I might not agree with every point he makes, but he generally has it on the mark when he talks about Canada just having way too much money laundering and drug trafficking going on. Like per capita, much more than the US, and there's borderline no enforcement. The US kind of resents the fact that they already pay for our military, basically, because our military has just become a DEI program with pencils instead of bullets. And now they're going to be expected to deal with the fact that David Eby and people like Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow are just letting opioids run free, and then we're just supposed to tell the Americans, not that much of it's coming over your border, especially considering a singular package of fentanyl, which a guy was just caught with 8 kilograms of it. I believe he was actually highlighted as a great citizen by the CBC at one point. That's enough to kill entire cities in the US. It's crazy.
How many, to the RCMP, how many people do you estimate are involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl in Canada? Do you have a ballpark estimate? Is it 1,000 people? Is it 10,000 people?
I don't have a ballpark figure on it.
So you have no idea how many people could possibly be involved in the fentanyl trade in Canada?
There's a significant group, significant number of organized crime group, but if you're asking me for a specific number, I can't give you a specific number.
How many organized crime groups are involved?
Over 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada, as assessed by the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada.
4,000.
See, maybe you weren't able to hear that well, but there are 4,000 criminal organizations operating in Canada today. Because this was just back in December of 2024, this question was asked. There are over 4,000 criminal gangs. You could say that there's probably as many criminal gangs in the US, if not more. But the problem is, again, it's the enforcement. It's the fact that these organizations really don't fear the police. I've heard that the fentanyl seizure rate in Canada, in terms of how much fentanyl is being able to be taken off the streets compared to how much has been sold, and I believe they calculate this based on how long an organization was selling before they cracked down on, and the timetable of how much was then recovered and how much was sold. They think that the rate for fentanyl seizures in Canada are as high as 1 in 30 in terms of for every one fentanyl pill taken off the street, there's 30 that are distributed, all the way down to just one is taken off the street per 97 on. That's that's ridiculous. That's disgusting. But we should highlight him anyways. Let's be nice to the man and talk about what his response to all this is, because I don't think he put out a video. But we have federal NDP leader here, Jagmeet Singh, saying, "Today, Donald Trump has unleashed tariffs on Canada that will hurt all of us and Americans. Now it is time for Canadians to stand strong and stand together. Our values and solidarity will not crumble in the face of Donald Trump's economic attack. New Democrats will be there to protect workers, to make sure there is help for everyone impacted by these tariffs. Canada strong, Canada is united." I love these socialist politicians who, as soon as the issue is Donald Trump putting taxes on Canadian exports, or I guess imports from Canada, suddenly they realize that taxes are actually very bad for economic growth and stability. But Jagmeet Singh has never flinched at increasing taxes on increasing capital gains inclusion rates, which thankfully they're canceling in the light of the economic, like the trade war that we might be starting. It's funny how they kept saying that it wasn't going to hurt the economy to increase the capital gains inclusion rate, but as soon as we're in a trade war, they immediately know that we should probably nix that. We need to nix a lot of stuff. Pierre Polyev was right in a post I was looking at the other for a little bit ago, saying that Canada needs to be like basically just axing every single stupid anti-energy policy that we can find if we're truly serious about trying to expand people's access to cheap energy in this country. But again, that probably won't happen because people like Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland and Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May, and I could just keep going down the list of every single left-wing politician, David Eby, they all really still value the abstract idea of fighting climate change more than they care about you being able to put food on your family's table. Here is another clip from the Justin Trudeau press conference.
What does it tell you about your relationship with President Trump that you've been trying to get a hold of him and he hasn't been speaking with you?
I think this is a time where we've all remarked on just how active President Trump has been in engaging with a wide range of topics in his first weeks in office. As you all know, I've had many good and substantive conversations with President Trump over the past months, where we've highlighted the work that we can do. Our ministers and officials have been engaging, in many cases like today, multiple times a day.
No, Melanie Joly was not. She actually only showed up to Washington, D.C. to try and divert this issue like 3 days ago. It was so late in the game. And what is he talking about? We're talking about things that we can build on and we can be just constructive on. Like, just say whether or not you actually made commitments on the border or on defense spending. What was he asking you in person? And what did you deliver? Because Trudeau, if he actually shows that Trump is acting in bad faith, which I'm not sure if Trump is or not, he could destroy him. He could show, here, Trump's a liar. I already said I'll do this, that, and everything he wanted. And he then said, I don't care, I'm tariffing you anyways. He would actually win the situation. The problem is that Trudeau has not been engaging in good faith, at least from my perspective. He is not. It's always, I have a plan to secure the border, but let's not do this tariff business. I'm like, then actually secure the border. Stop talking about it, or else you can't really call his bluff.
With their counterparts to talk through these issues, to move forward on areas of mutual concern. We will continue to engage, and I will continue to be there to work with President Trump as we've worked together in the past.
What do you mean you're going to be there? You're leaving, again, as I keep saying, in March. Why would Trump get on the phone with you when he, one, already doesn't have any respect for you, and two, you know, you're leaving? Why would he get on the phone with you? You are literally not the person that he really needs to be talking to at this point. In fact, he should probably be talking to Freeland or Carney or Polyev instead of Trudeau. But yeah, and here, this is the most absurd claim that he ended up making. You're not even going to believe this.
President Trump said in the executive order that it's about the border. end fentanyl. Do you think that this is what it's about?
We have one of the strongest, more secure borders in the world
What, compared to like Syria and Iraq?
between Canada and the United States. As I said, less than 1% of fentanyl going into the United States come from Canada. Less than 1% of illegal migrants going into the United States come from Canada.
But why are there 10 times as many people caught in the United States on the terror watch list who entered through Canada than Mexico? Obviously, we don't have economic migrants for coming from Canada going into the United States, but isn't it kind of scarier that somebody's coming from Canada to the US? Because they're definitely not showing up to try and take advantage of welfare programs or get a job or whatever. They are coming for specifically non-economic reasons. They're sneaking over the border. And this guy is just belittling the US administration at a time where he's supposed to be looking across the aisle and saying, aren't we allies? Can't we work together? And he's saying, only 1% of fentanyl over the border is from Canada. No, 1% of fentanyl seized at ports of entry are from Canada because border security along the US-Canada border is terrible. I'm going to read you guys now what basically my suggestion on this whole situation was, what my whole read was. I know I've been kind of giving it here, but I thought my approach seems perfectly rational. We can have, as Canada and the US, a big win-win here. A win for Canada where we don't have tariffs and we also get other value. I say it's a bad argument to say that catching fentanyl coming over the US border from Canada is the US government's responsibility. The American government is annoyed that Canada's ports are easy to traffic drug materials through to then be manufactured into fentanyl in a decriminalized environment like BC with little enforcement. And after near zero serious enforcement is done on Canada's side of the border, the US government is then expected to catch all the easily concealed and odorless fentanyl coming through ports of entry and the undefended border. This is why 10 times as many people on the terror watch list enter the US through Canada than through Mexico. It's technically the US's responsibility to defend their border, but allies don't just let problems run rampant on their side of the border and then expect the other ally to figure it out if it threatens citizens on their side. Security has become a joke on terror money laundering and drug trafficking in many jurisdictions of Canada. By the way, there are big benefits to increasing border security, and Canada could have taken a tough stance on the US government by highlighting the issue of illegal gun trafficking in Canada. They could then demand if Canada increases security on its side, the US needs to crack down harder on gun traffickers on their side. Instead, we are just throwing mud with the Americans, and people are making arguments about how Trump's administration was not reasonable enough. Was Trump reasonable? Not really, but we played into it by wanting to make this a full-scale schoolyard fight. Danielle Smith and Scott Moe have taken a strong position that allows them to call the Americans bluff if they didn't take tariffs off, since their promises are increasing security fast, but the rest of the premiers and Trudeau are playing into Trump's hands by turning this into a pure power game, and Canada cannot win. I, of course, agree with me, but I think that is about the right take. Right now, the US can just point at us and say, you didn't do anything that we asked, so why would we work with you? And on our side of the border, we keep saying, like, Neil Young lyrics as our arguments that we can get together, we can fight the man together. And it's like, no, we can't if you're not willing to do anything to meet them halfway. People keep thinking that, well, if you meet Trump halfway, then you're betraying Canada. No, it's a trade negotiation with a much more powerful country. I am not anti-patriotic to acknowledge that. It's just reality, people. I'm not trying to say that Canada sucks by acknowledging it. I am simply saying that we can't beat them in a trade war, which is why it was good that Trudeau didn't exactly try and start a full-on trade war. It's kind of a mild, cold trade war. But it's just that we need to avoid this to help Canadians out. It's not about standing up for Canada as a nation. It's just not going to work that way. We need to stand up for Canada and the US as a positive alliance that actually listens to each other. Because Canada keeps saying, US isn't being reasonable, but at the same time, they have an argument that we're not being reasonable. So how about we all try and be a little bit more reasonable? Anyways, That's it for me in this video, guys. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, do all that great stuff, and I'll see you later.